Why, hello. Fancy meeting you here again in this second video. Um, yeah, my name is Kristen Marie Stelter. You can call me Kris or Professor Kris. Again, my pronouns are they, them, theirs. This is my introduction video to give you a bit more background about myself, kind of how I came to teach at MSU Denver, my work since graduating from the program, and some of my own professional and personal experiences that I'm excited to bring to our conversations this semester. So I was born in Arizona. I know you didn't think we were going to go back that far, but I primarily grew up in the Midwest, Wisconsin and Michigan. And then in 2016, I moved to Colorado to get my MFA in theater and contemporary performance from Naropa University. Prior to that, I worked in customer service and I worked in banking. Um, I'm also very artistically inclined, you could say. I do theater, expressive arts, that kind of thing. That's kind of always been a constant for me. I've been involved in theater since I was in middle school, and I did dance prior to that. So I wouldn't call myself a dancer now, not for a long time, but I can act like I can dance. So there's that. Um, After I graduated from my MFA program, I wanted to teach, but the program didn't really allow for us to do any teaching experience while we were in the program. So um, I didn't want to have to adjunct a whole bunch and figure out that stuff. So I went back to banking, really hated it. Customer service is hard. People are super emotional about their money. But it was more so just like I didn't really feel like I was helping anybody, and it didn't feel meaningful to me in any particular way. And so I ended up going back to school to get my second master's. I started school in 2020, which I don't know if y'all remember, but that was a pretty crap year for a lot of folks. I lived in Boulder during the Marshall fires. That also happened while I was at MSU Denver pursuing my MSW. So kind of a really stressful, weird time. And everybody kind of had to be online. So figured out what worked for me and what didn't pretty quickly. Um, and then from there, uh, my first internship was working with kind of a wish of a lifetime um, organization, but it was for older adults. I really I've been passionate about hospice care ever since I lost my mom when I was 14 to cancer. And so, kind of having dealt with the existential stuff around death and dying and processing all of that in my teens and having to pivot, to being an adult and a young adult, um, I've had a lot of time to kind of process that and wanted to be present with people, during these really hard times in their lives. So when I was in the program, I primarily was focused on hospice and end of life care, medical social work. And my second year internship, I did pivot from my first internship to um, a uh, a different one in my second semester, just because COVID was making it so hard to get any kind of clinical experience at the time. And so I worked with Caring for Denver, which was or is still a grant organization that takes government funds from the city of Denver and distributes them to, um, grant recipients. So it's kind of its own like grant awarding body that reviews local applications and gives out grants for particular areas that the city of Denver wanted to work towards improving. And so that was really cool. And then my second year, I did an internship with Modus Theater, which they basically work with folks from historically marginalized populations, DACA recipients, formerly incarcerated individuals, to kind of develop their stories into monologues that are then presented. And eventually, what happens with the iterations of the monologues is law enforcement and community leaders, policymakers get invited to read the monologues with the individual whose monologue it is, like their story, standing right there. And then there's like a talk back afterwards about, how these experiences really could and should be changed, and what we can do as a community to, um, yeah, disentangle some of the systemic oppression that's accumulated over several years and decades. So that was really cool. Very hard work, but really cool and meaningful work. Um, After I graduated, I worked in hospice. I worked in a for-profit hospice, and that was not great for me. That hospice actually, since I moved out of Colorado, no longer exists. They went defunct, I think. I then started working at True Pace, so program for all-inclusive care for the elderly. That was kind of cool, but not as focused on end-of-life care as I was interested in. In 2023, my spouse and I moved from Colorado to Rhode Island to be closer to family. And I worked in a hospice that was nonprofit. But then we were starting to have some productivity goals, and that was feeling kind of icky. So I pivoted again to medical social work with uh, dialysis patients. And for whatever reason, that that was hard. That was hard. Because I was basically an insurance person. It wasn't even about resources and advocating for client care. It was very much just like, what's your insurance? How do we bill insurance? How do we do these things? And it was just kind of a rough setup with the clinic that I was hired into. So last year, so that would be 2025, I moved from there to, I didn't think I was going to pivot to private practice or group practice until later on in my career, but I ended up joining a group practice in Fall River, Massachusetts. And then from there, I'm now pivoting from group practice to private practice because I want to get really local. I live in Rhode Island, but I work in Massachusetts, and the commute has kind of been getting to me. I've got some invisible disabilities, I think I mentioned in the last video, and just the commute and the stress of, kind of following by somebody else's rules were kind of just starting to get to me. So, um, all of those places I have encountered LGBTQIA plus folks. All of those places I have been a queer person in a workspace that hasn't always been receptive or welcoming to um, you know, uh, an LGBTQIA plus identifying person. Um, and it's been an education, let me tell you. Um, I'm excited to share my experience with you. I think I mentioned in the past video that the intersection of like LGBTQIA plus identities and disabled folks, folks with chronic conditions, terminal conditions, um, grief, loss, death and dying, disenfranchised grief of um, chosen family and partners who may not legally on paper be our partners. Um, just a lot of fear and uncertainty around being um, an LGBTQIA plus identifying person in this world right now, and how to best support and kind of validate those feelings while also maintaining practice, like best practices around protecting uh, individuals. For example, like not including things in our notes, like buzzwords that AI might pick up on, especially if folks have like state or federal health insurance. Um, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But I also am very passionate about existential therapy, kind of the big life questions. Who am I? Why am I? What am I doing here? What's the meaning? What's the purpose? Why am I in so much pain? Why me? Why us? Why this? Why now? Um, I dig those questions and like creating meaning, helping folks find meaning in their experiences. I also find a lot of joy in expressive arts therapy, but also just expressive arts in general. I'm in a band. Uh, I haven't really done any theater for quite some time, but I want to get back to it in some way, shape, or form. It's, kind of a passion project of mine that I would like to do a group therapy uh, session or lead a group therapy session with LGBTQIA plus identifying youth, where we identify what are the things that you need your community to know and how do we tell those stories so that it's cathartic and empowering and creates a sense of agency and accountability and ownership while also inviting community members in, political leaders, folks who can write policy, um, to then, facilitate conversations around, okay, so how do we make things better for our youth? Because, oof, there's a lot of hopelessness right now, and it's hard to sit with that, and it's hard to reframe that right now. I would say. Um, so just kind of being present with people in those hard times is really, I think, my strength. One of the things I really loved about hospice was I've never had a job where people just thanked you for showing up and just being present, you know. I think that's very similar to the hard times that people go through and the big questions we ask ourselves. Like, I think it isn't necessarily that we need somebody to tell us that it'll be okay or that we're going to figure it out or that everything will be okay in the end or anything like that. It's just that we need to be witnessed in that and like be seen in our journey of discovering and uncovering that meaning for ourselves, if that makes sense. Because I can't tell you what the meaning is or why you're here or why your pain is the way it is or any of that. um cool. I really think that we all have something to offer and to give in this course, and I'm actually kind of grateful that we're a bit of a smaller section together, so we can really kind of get into some of this deeper stuff and some of the stuff that's going on in the world right now that's really difficult to sit with. Um, and I look forward to kind of bearing witness with you. Um, and being a little part of your journey into the social work realm. I think it's such an important and critical piece of whatever comes next, for all of us. So, yeah.